Welcome back to the channel, folks. If you're obsessed with massive weapons and insane engineering from WWII, buckle up, because today we're diving into the absolute kings of big guns, Schwerer Gustav and Dora, the 800mm railway monsters that still hold the record as the largest artillery pieces ever built. These weren't just guns, they were engineering nightmares weighing over 1,300 tons each, longer than a city block, and capable of hurling shells the size of a small car more than 30 miles away. Hitler personally loved these beasts, and they were designed to smash through any fortress the Allies could throw up. We'll break down how they came to be, the mind-blowing specs, their real combat use, and why, despite all that power, they ended up being more propaganda than game-changer. Let's start with the origin story. It all goes back to the late 1930s when Germany was planning the invasion of France. The French had spent years building the Maginot Line, a massive chain of super-fortified bunkers, underground tunnels, and thick concrete forts along the border that regular artillery just bounced off. Hitler wanted something that could crack those nuts open like eggs. So in 1936, the Army High Command approached the Krupp family, the legendary German steel and arms makers, with a crazy request. Build a gun that can punch through 7 meters of reinforced concrete or 1 meter of steel armor from dozens of miles away. Alfred Krupp jumped at it because massive projects meant massive profits, and by 1937 they had a design ready. The gun would fire an 800mm shell, that's 80 centimeters, almost 32 inches in diameter, and the whole thing would ride on railway tracks because no truck or tank chassis could ever carry that weight. Hitler got a personal briefing on the project in 1939 and was hooked. He named the first gun Schwerer Gustav after his father Gustav Krupp, and the second one built later became Dora after the wife of the chief engineer, or sometimes just called Gustav II. Construction started in earnest at the Krupp Works in Essen, and it took thousands of workers, special cranes, and years of precision machining to make it happen. The barrel alone was over 100 feet long and weighed 400 tons. By early 1941, Gustav was ready for testing at the Rügen Island Proving Ground, and when they fired it the first time, the shockwave shattered windows miles away, and the shell dug a crater the size of a house. The army was thrilled, but getting it to the front was a whole different nightmare. They had to build special curved railway tracks, double reinforced bridges, and even lay new lines in secret. We're just getting started on how these monsters actually worked and what they did in combat, so if you're already hooked, hit that like button, subscribe for more over-the-top WWII weapons, and let's keep rolling into part 2 where we get into the insane details and their one big show in battle. Okay, we're back, and now let's talk specs, because Gustav and Dora were straight-up engineering insanity. The full setup weighed about 1,350 tons. That's heavier than a fully loaded modern jumbo jet. The gun barrel itself was 106 feet long, mounted on a massive railway carriage that needed not one, not two, but twin sets of parallel tracks, 40 rails in total for stability when firing. To move the whole thing, they used 2 huge diesel locomotives just to push it into position, and once on site, it took up to 2,000 men, engineers, gunners, flak crews, and support troops to operate and protect it. Assembly at the firing site could take weeks. They'd lay curved tracks so the gun could swing side to side for aiming since the barrel couldn't traverse much on its own, dig massive foundations to absorb recoil, and camouflage the whole area with nets and fake buildings because Allied planes would love to bomb something that big. The ammo was just as ridiculous. There were 2 main types of shells. The high explosive one weighed 4.8 tons, almost 5 tons, and carried over 1,500 pounds of explosives designed to obliterate bunkers. The concrete-piercing shell was even heavier at 7 tons, with a hardened nose to burrow deep before detonating. Loading took a special gantry crane. The shell went in first, then separate propellant bags, and the breech closed like a bank vault. Rate of fire? About 14 rounds per day max, because everything had to cool down and realign after each shot. The recoil was so violent, it pushed the whole carriage back up to 30 feet even on those reinforced tracks. Range was unreal. The HE shell could reach 29 miles, the armor-piercing one up to 24 miles, and accuracy was surprisingly good for something so huge thanks to precise surveying and spotter planes. Power came from massive electrical generators on site because the hydraulics and cranes needed serious juice. Protection wasn't ignored either. They surrounded the gun with an entire flak battalion of 88mm and smaller anti-aircraft guns, plus searchlights and radar, because everyone knew this thing was a priority target. Cost? One gun ran about 7 million Reichsmarks, enough to build hundreds of regular tanks or fighters. Gustav saw real action first in mid-1942 during the siege of Sevastopol in Crimea. The Soviets had turned the city into a fortress with massive coastal batteries and underground forts that were holding up the German advance big time. Gustav was secretly railed down through Poland and Ukraine, assembled near Bakhchisarai about 20 miles from the city, and on June 5th it fired its first combat round. Over the next month, it lobbed around 48 shells, completely destroying key Soviet forts like Maxim Gorky 1. Even ammo bunkers buried under 100 feet of rock and concrete got obliterated when those 7-ton shells dug in and blew up. The psychological effect was huge too. Soviet troops reportedly panicked hearing the incoming freight train roar of those shells. Dora got deployed later but saw less action. It was sent to Stalingrad but never fired in anger there because the situation fell apart too fast. There was even a plan to use one against Gibraltar, but logistics killed it. These guns proved they could do what they were built for, smash the toughest fixed defenses. But they also showed their limits, and in Part 3, we'll cover why they became white elephants and what happened to them in the end. Stay tuned. All right, final part. Let's wrap up the story of Gustav and Dora and why these biggest guns ever built ended up being more trouble than they were worth. After Sevastopol, Gustav was railed back to Germany for refurbishment, but by 1943, the war had changed completely. The front lines were moving fast, cities weren't static fortresses anymore, and the Allies had total air superiority. Moving a 1,350-ton gun across bombed-out railways took forever and screamed, "Bomb me," from the sky. Recon planes spotted the massive track layouts easily, and setting up took so long that by the time it was ready, the battle had usually moved on. Fuel, manpower, and steel were all critically short. Those 2,000 support troops could have crewed dozens of Tiger tanks instead. Ammo production was another bottleneck. Each shell cost a fortune and took months to make, and transporting those 7-ton monsters needed special rail cars. The guns became symbols more than weapons, great for propaganda films showing Hitler inspecting them, but useless against mobile warfare. In 1944, as the Allies advanced, the Germans tried to hide Gustav in tunnels near Metz in France for possible use against the Maginot extensions, but it never fired again. Dora was partially scrapped for parts. By early 1945, with the Red Army closing in, both guns were ordered destroyed to avoid capture. Gustav was blown up at its storage depot in Bavaria in April 1945. Allied troops later found the massive wreckage, barrel twisted and carriage shattered. Dora's remains were discovered in pieces scattered across Germany. The Soviets captured some components and studied them, but never built anything similar. Today, the only surviving pieces are a few shells and parts of the carriage on display at museums like the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum or in Russia. There's also a massive 800mm shell at the Imperial War Museum in London. So, were they worth it? Tactically, Gustav did help take Sevastopol faster and saved German lives in that one siege, but strategically, they were a waste. Resources poured into 2 guns could have built thousands of Panthers or fighters that might have made a real difference. They showed the limits of superweapons. Bigger isn't always better when mobility and air power rule the battlefield. The 800mm record still stands today. No modern artillery even comes close because missiles and precision bombs do the job cheaper and faster. Gustav and Dora remain the ultimate examples of Nazi over-engineering, impressive, terrifying, and ultimately doomed. That's the full story of the railway monsters. If this blew your mind, smash that like button. Tell me in the comments if you think these guns were genius or total madness. Subscribe for more massive WWII weapons and forgotten projects, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, stay curious, and I'll catch you soon.